This podcast is made possible by VersaPay.
Hi, this is Matthias, CFO from Trivago. You're listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 882.
However, like many other companies, we're looking at continued challenging capital markets environment. My job first and foremost, like I said earlier, what metric do I feel responsible for the most is cash. Cash is king. It's important that we can weather this. And so I want to manage our cash wisely. I mentioned we're approaching profitability. We need to get to there. I want people to feel confident, people at ChromaDex, that their CFO is a safe pair of hands, that I'm going to help us make wise investment decisions that do have a short-term return on investment. And that was a pretty dramatic pivot we made midway through 2022.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Brianna Gerber, CFO of ChromaDex. When Brianna Gerber tells us she was once known as the investor relations person, most likely to be knocking on doors, we can't help but want to step back in time and accompany the IR senior manager on her earnings season's tour of duty. Turn back the clock, and Gerber, an equity research analyst with more than a decade of experience behind her, joins toy giant Mattel Inc. as a senior IR manager. The glass wall she once peered through as an equity analyst has vanished, and Gerber is now able to engage one-on-one with leaders from marketing, sales, treasury, and tax. Those leaders who were best able to explain the complexities of Mattel's business. CFO Brianna Gerber shares that experience and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. When your accounts receivable automation focuses only on back office tasks, you forget the most important stakeholder, your customers. VersaPay gives you all the tools you need to automate those tasks, plus the collaboration tools to take on everything that automation alone simply can't. This doesn't just increase efficiencies and accelerate cash flow, but also creates a dramatically improved experience for your customers. And as the economy tightens, can you really afford to risk losing customers over an invoice-to-cash process they find frustrating? With VersaPay, clients typically achieve 50% less time managing receivables, 25% faster payments, 30% fewer past due invoices, and 81% customer portal adoption. Learn more about VersaPay's collaborative AR, ERP payments, and cash application solutions at versapay.com/CFO. Hello, we're speaking with Brianna Gerber, CFO of ChromaDex. Brianna, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jack, for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
So, Brianna, we want to go on your journey with you. We want you to look back in time. Share with us some of the moments where you believe your experiences helped prepare you for this role, the CFO role. What would those have been?
Sure, Jack. So my career path hasn't been a straight line. That wasn't a straight finance moving up the ranks, so to speak, path. It definitely zigged and zagged, and I think that makes life interesting. So one common thread throughout my journey, though, has been my intellectual curiosity. So let me kind of step you through what led me to this point and why that's the common thread. Even from an early age, I was always a curious kid. My parents encouraged that, ask questions about the world, learn from others. And, I also always did have an aptitude for numbers, but I thought maybe finance was not the most exciting. It could be dull. And so when I went to University of Southern California for undergrad, I did business administration, but a dual emphasis in corporate finance, the more traditional, and then the entrepreneur program, which really fed that intellectual curiosity. The program was fantastic because we, from the ground up, did feasibility analysis. We wrote a business plan. We had guest speakers, alumni that just brought these rich experiences. And we're encouraged to even reach out to people in the community, in the field we were interested in, and learn about the business model we were trying to prove out. So that fed that intellectual curiosity. Then I went and took a bit of a safer path right out of college. I went to the Capital Group companies. They are one of the largest active asset managers. You may have heard of the American funds. And of my 11 years there, I did equity research. I was an equity research associate. I worked for 7 analysts over 8 years. That might be a record among research associates. But what I really took away from that experience that I bring forward culturally is it was a flat organization. You could talk to anyone. You were encouraged to be curious, ask those questions, learn from your peers, and have that dialogue. And businesses are always changing. The world is always changing. The markets are always changing. So it was also never dull. And one big takeaway there is every analyst thought differently about investments. And they maybe didn't think the same way that I did. So I had a real mindset shift there that served me well, which was when one of my analysts said, "Your curiosity is great, but right now it's distracting. I want you to first learn how I think about an investment and I approach the research process, and then we'll dial it back up." Now, you can imagine as a young kid thinking you were going to change the game and bring all this new insight. It was a bit jarring for me at first. But when I really took it in and I thought about it, I realized how powerful that was because I was ignoring the wisdom of experience. I wasn't first learning how they thought and listening actively. And I brought that to then every analyst that I worked with, every job and team that I took on and company that I went to. And so again, it's that dialing in that intellectual curiosity in the right way. Stepping through to the next role, investments are just naturally at 30,000 feet. So as someone who really wants to know, as the saying goes, how the sausage is made, I took the step to go to investor relations at Mattel. You may have heard of their brands. They're iconic. Barbie. I was a Barbie girl myself personally, so it's very nostalgic to be there. Fisher-Price, Hot Wheels. So inside a company, it was a natural next step. And that intellectual curiosity thread, I was known for being the investor relations person that during earnings would be knocking on doors, calling the marketing team, calling the commercial team, talking to treasury, even tax, and saying, what's really going on? What's the story behind the numbers before I told them? That led me to corporate FP&A at Mattel, financial planning and analysis. I know you know, and probably your listeners as well. Again, still pretty high level though, but getting deeper as I went into the business. And ultimately, I loved the role. I loved the numbers, did long-term strategic planning, but was kind of known to be just corporate. The board presentations, communicating to the leadership team, and that thirst to learn more of how things work ultimately led me to ChromaDex. ChromaDex's CFO, when I joined, was the former CFO of Mattel for almost 20 years, Kevin Farr. So he was a phenomenal mentor of mine. He gave me a call and said, "I heard you're thinking about leaving Mattel. Do you want to join me in this micro cap startup company and lead FP&A, lead investor relations, really build out a team which didn't exist, learn how to build a brand globally, learn supply chain and operations and capital raising and all these other functions that I didn't have exposure to." And so, of course, as you're following my theme, that intellectual curiosity was piqued. And I said, of course, and I've been here just over 4 years. He retired in August of last year. I was interim CFO, and then I became permanent CFO early this year.
Really an interesting segue from the toy realm into biotech. You don't see that very often. You also don't see very often. You joined in the investor relations function and you segue really into FP&A. Was that difficult to do? Did you raise any eyebrows when you did it? Or was it a common path?
That's a great question. I think I did raise a few eyebrows. I was on track to be promoted in investor relations, thought maybe that was going to be my career path. There was certainly faster, immediate upward mobility staying in that lane, and decided to make more of a lateral move, forego that promotion, and reprove myself in corporate FP&A. So ultimately, having the confidence in myself to say, I understand numbers. I understand why they tell a story. I can translate a lot of what I've learned at this 30,000 foot view and go deeper. But yes, it was definitely a reinventing, reproving. But for me, I feel like we're constantly reinventing, and that's what keeps our careers interesting, to stay challenged.
Yeah, I don't think it's uncommon to find investor relation professionals with that background, with that equity research background. And many of them go right to the top of the investor relations functions, but they don't always have the foresight and maybe the confidence to segue back into FP&A to get those bona fides. Am I repeating that correctly, or?
Yeah, I think it's good also that I realized that early, that a career investor relations role, it's, obviously a wonderful role, and you're meeting new people and you're learning. And again, companies are changing. So you're continuing to evolve with the company. But for me, I wanted to do something a bit different. And so realizing that early in my career and having the, ability to make that pivot was really important for me. And I think that was a key defining moment in the path that I took and zigged and zagged on.
What is this land bridge from Mattel to biotech? What was it that maybe brought your mentor there, which I would imagine gave you some confidence that it was the right call as well, a good opportunity for you as well?
Yeah, well, he was actually retiring from Mattel. He'd had a long career there, and he had a relationship with ChromaDex's CEO that dated back to his Mattel days. So they'd kept in touch. And when the CEO saw the opportunity to reach back out to him and say, you want to join me on this journey now? And he started, as any good CFO would do, right? Follow the numbers, look at the 10Ks, follow the cash. So I think what brought me here is just one, the potential to build something, to come out of, for him, retirement, for me, for make that jump and go deeper and build something. And what we're building also, and the mission and what we had in this ingredient was really powerful as a calling. I'd say it's a real calling and mission driven for many people that are here that makes this company unique.
So let's ask you that question then about ChromaDex. What does this company do? What is it about today? What sets it apart?
So I'm not sure if you've heard about something called NAD, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And if you haven't, or your listeners haven't, you're not alone. I hadn't before I decided to research this company. So what NAD is it is in all of your 37 trillion cells, and it's vital to life as we know it. I'm a business major, not a bio major, but you learn about ATP, cellular energy. So it's that cellular repair. It's vital to all of those things. And so without NAD, cells die. It's vital to life as we know it. And it begins to decline at age 30. And by age 70, you have 65% of the levels that you did at age 30. It's constantly being consumed. Everyday stressors, I'll name them. I'm sure we've all had some of them, right? Being out in the sun, overeating, even exercising, right, can be a stressor on your muscles. Alcohol consumption, lack of sleep, all these things. There are also, various disease states. We don't market that. We sell a supplement, which I'll talk about in a moment. But there's research on also disease states that deplete NAD. And so essentially it boils down to cells under metabolic stress are consuming NAD, and it's getting depleted. Our ingredient, which is called nicotinamide riboside, we trademarked it Niagen, elevates levels of NAD by 40 to 50% after 2 weeks. It's dose dependent, but you're elevating those levels of NAD. And finally, we have so like you said, we're a bioscience company. We're dedicated to science-based solutions for healthy aging around NAD. We have a lot of what they're called NAD precursors that elevate NAD, but our core ingredient today is Niagen, and our brand is True Niagen, which did about 60 million of sales, primarily e-commerce, but we're also sold in Hong Kong, Macau, China, Singapore, parts of Europe, Australia, New Zealand. That was 2021. We haven't yet reported this past year, 2022, but we had projected growth for the total company. So to give you a flavor, we built that brand from 2017 to 2021 at 60 million of sales, which I think is a pretty exciting thing, and obviously looking to continue to build it.
Now, the company had gone public. Now, was that before or after your arrival?
So they've been public. When I joined, they were already public, so I wasn't part of the IPO process. So traded on the NASDAQ, a little over 100 million market cap today, like many biotech type stocks, that's down from prior levels. It's a 20-something-year-old company. Our now chairman of the board, Frank Jacks, was a co-founder, and they started as an analytical reference standards and services company. So what that means is if companies are looking for purity in ingredients, we actually sell the standard that compares that purity level. So that scientific rigor, that focus is in our DNA dating back 20 years. We moved from that business to sell an ingredient, Niagen as an ingredient. And then we ultimately made a pivot to move away from an ingredient business to a consumer business, recognizing what we had. We still sell selectively our ingredient to, among the most respected health and wellness companies, including Nestle Health Science. We have a deal with them to sell ingredient. Health and Happiness Group, they're stronger in Asia, but they're a fairly large company in Asia. We call them H&H for short. Roe was another company, you may have heard of them, that we sell to, and some other longer term partners like Life Extension, who has a very loyal following of supplement consumers as well. So we do sell the ingredient, but we primarily focus on our own consumer brand today.
So just so the listeners know, you stepped in 2018 and became Senior Director of Financial Planning and Analysis. You were in short order the Vice President at FP&A and reporting directly to the CFO, of course. And so you had this nice sort of on-ramp, I suppose, to the CFO office, where it was only last summer you come into that role. Can you tell us a little bit about that first 100 days now as you look back?
Yeah, of course. So I did have the benefit of learning the company through the 4 years before I took on the role. So if I'm thinking about where I started diving in, had I not been there, follow the numbers, dig into the numbers, really understand them, and talk to different business leaders to get the perspective, right? And different perspectives. We have everything from R&D to marketing and consumer and supply chain. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I had the benefit, and I think it served me well in taking on the CFO role, that I had that perspective already. So my advice to myself and to others aspiring to the C-suite is, in that role, it's less about what you do and more about what you inspire others to do for the company that will lead to success. And especially we are a 20-year-old company. In many ways, we're a startup with a turnaround and a pivot in the business. So we're very much chartering our own path here as I've joined. But having a team of really dedicated, passionate people around you that aren't afraid to give you their opinion, to say no respectfully, of course, that's what makes it richer and leads to better decisions. So build strong teams, empower them, hold them accountable for delivering. My mentor, Kevin Farr, really lived that. He empowered me, held me accountable. And I think there's no better way, I'm a parent as well, than modeling behavior. So I try to do that for my teams. I think they'd say that is what I do. And one thing I would have done sooner, I was forced into it becoming CFO because I went from a team of 3, just finance, FP&A primarily, to 30 plus that's a big jump overnight, is learning to let go. I'm very hands-on. I like to roll up my sleeves, partly that intellectual curiosity, partly I always like my teams to know that I understand what it takes them to do the work, right? And that I can get in the weeds and no task is too small and roll up my sleeves. However, I waited too long, I'd say, to let go. I thought I was protecting people by not putting on too much, not giving them that pressure and that stress, and feeling like it was my job to protect them from that. And it, looking back, didn't serve me well. I had to switch immediately without kind of laying the groundwork. And I would have done that sooner, because I have been so proud of my team stepping in, stepping up. They've surpassed my expectations, and I would have just done that a little sooner. And the last point I'd say is, this doesn't suit everybody, but it suits me. Ask those, what I've heard coined as powerful questions. Just gain that deeper understanding of the business, take all that input, analyze it, but then you're the CFO, the buck stops here. Take it all in, listen, then lead, and lead decisively when you do. So I'm trying to live that more and more, especially as I step from a senior finance role to the CFO role.
Curious as to what, and this helps from one industry to the next, we wonder what the metrics or the numbers are that you really pay close attention to or are looking at as you have your first cup of coffee in the morning. What are those top of mind metrics for you? What are you constantly looking at?
Yeah, well, I have the benefit of the business being about 60% e-commerce. That includes Amazon as a marketplace and our own website, which the backbone is Shopify, but TrueNiagen.com. So one thing that I'm very proud of what the team did is build processes in place to look at the numbers. I would say I look at a daily report. I really cross-functionally with marketing and finance, look at more of a P&L view weekly. And so we can ensure that we're not overspending. We're measuring the ROAS, the return on our advertising spend. And so I do look at that, because for our small company sales, sales can really solve a lot when you have, in some ways, a largely fixed cost structure. So I'm constantly looking at that, planning conservatively, and looking at our spend. And we've got that spend in a very good place, I'd say, over the last year in particular. Those are the ones that, one, because I have the benefit of seeing them daily and weekly, I focus on. So I think that's probably what I would say. The other one is, I was once asked at a conference before I was CFO, what metric do you feel most responsible for? And I said cash. And cash, as you know, it's everything. It's our working capital. It's how we're, paying our bills. It's the terms that we have with customers, collecting, and of course our spending, our, employee related costs. And so that's also one that I look at regularly as a not yet profitable, but approaching profitable company, which has been my key mandate as CFO, to plan conservatively on sales, conservatively on expenses, achieve profitability on an adjusted EBITDA basis, and then build from there.
As you were overseeing the FP&A function, as it relates to R&D and resource allocation, along the way, as you grew confident, understanding the model, did you reorganize in some fashion or encourage the previous CFO to do it? Can't we do this a little better this way? I don't know. Something?
Yeah. So we have something, we're internally calling it Operation Opti, which basically is optimize. And this is something that I thought was important to bring to life, because it's encouraging people across the organization to think differently about how we do things, and not just here's how we've always done things. And we're spotlighting at our town halls, from the small to the big, what are those examples that show people thinking differently about our business? So I wouldn't just say it's R&D. That is one of the areas that we have thought differently. We have a program called our ChromaDex External Research Program. This is unique in the supplement industry, that is not known for its scientific rigor and research. It's known for more about selling over science. And since 2013, we've been giving our ingredient free of charge to independent researchers that do independent research that's led to 24 published clinical studies, 300 plus preclinical studies, and we've signed over 250 material transfer agreements. That is a wonderful proof point to learn about this important ingredient that we have. But as you can imagine, those studies get bigger and they get more expensive and more clinical. So that's one area that we've been encouraging the teams to take a look at too, as the company itself is in a different place, just by one example. But it's really an across the board. Where can we find those efficiencies?
The FP&A team, as you described it, it was a small team, probably the right size for this size enterprise and where you are. But is there anything you did with FP&A that reorganized it or deployed the talent a little differently, embedded them a little differently, something paired them up with other parts of the organization that perhaps never had a strong connection? Don't know.
Yeah, no, that's really important to me as well. I would say often how I lead, there's that I saw something that was 70% organic, again, just modeling the opportunities, the experiences to learn and mentor. There's 20% kind of the more actual mentoring of people, and 10% the, let's call them, courses, things like that you do that's a little bit more structured. So my style very much is in that 70%. And well, it maybe wasn't conscious. What I'd like to do is have people on the FP&A team, which there was none before I came. So I recruited first someone who worked with me at Mattel, and then he brought someone who he worked with at KPMG. And so it's great to build a team that way. And then we rounded it out further from there. Having them be business partners across, for example, R&D, across e-commerce in particular, as that's a big piece of our business, and also as a brand building company, a large cost center as well with marketing. So I have made a conscious effort, and the teams have done a wonderful job embedding themselves as those finance business partners. There's a vision that as we get to a bigger scale, you actually have that dedicated finance partner. I saw it at Mattel. We're not there yet. So it's been more of encouraging people to do that as part of their job, in addition to their day jobs. And luckily, I have teams that are also intellectually curious, want to stretch, want to get that perspective. And so we can naturally build upon it. Supply chain is the other area where I have a key business partner with supply chain, which now reports up into my team as well.
We always like to ask about talent with the finance leader, human capital. And of course, during COVID, it became top of mind for many finance leaders, first from a safety perspective, but then thinking a little differently about the hybrid organization. Curious if your mindset, as far as talent is concerned, has changed in some way, or you're looking at the world a little differently in some way, or maybe not.
I do think the world has shifted in a more permanent way, going back to the way it was, knowing what we now know. And my personal experience is I'm a mom of two, a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. And it's been wonderful to be able to be so productive, to be able to take them to and from school, what would otherwise be my lunch break. And it's almost like an always on, right? Because you never leave your office, so to speak. So I found myself to be highly productive working from home. And we've offered a flexible work environment. There's some roles that have to go in because we have a lab. We do quality testing in Longmont, Colorado. So they were always there. So I think the operative word here for us has been flexible, because I do think it's an important recruiting tool. We're able to recruit talent that's remote that otherwise wouldn't be in our hubs, in the Los Angeles area. So I do think it's shifted there. At the same time, I find that, human beings need connection. And so what I've been encouraging and people are excited to do is, can we get together in the office if, for example, you're doing the annual operating plan and there's no substitute for sitting around the table and having a dialogue. You're doing some strategic planning, you're going to a board meeting, things like that. Or just to enjoy each other's company, celebrate after earnings and do some Again, very tactical work as well that day. So that's been working for us. At least it's been working for the finance team. Maybe there's other functions. Again, I mentioned marketing, that creativity, that always together, lends itself more. So can't speak as much to that. And then the last part about being in person, at least in enough of a way that you have the touch points, is I do think people are what keep people at companies. You enjoy being together, you learn from each other. It's just richer. So you need some of that. And it also breaks down some barriers where maybe you're having a challenge, with someone. And if you're behind a screen and there's not that personal interaction, it's just not the same. So I think it's a balance. And I do think it's changed my perspective, but for the better. I think we can have both.
Great. Thank you for that. We are up to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you just for one moment of insight that happened along the way. And again, the idea is just to have finance leaders share some of those moments where, unlike other executives, they have the lines of sight into the business and they can respond to them. What would you share with us as far as a finance strategic moment?
Sure. So, I think one term, even if CFOs have different roles, that resonates with everyone and is in everyone's area of responsibility, is the annual operating plan, or the AOP, as we all affectionately call it. When I was at Mattel in corporate FP&A, I participated in that and helped lead it for 3 years. And I saw 3 different approaches: the tops down, the bottoms up, and let's call it a bit of a hybrid with driving some alignment across the brand and the commercial teams up front. Now, in my experience, neither is perfect, neither tops down nor bottoms up. They both fall short. On one hand, you risk creating unrealistic expectations. People don't feel bought in. They don't feel like they've had an opportunity to have a voice, in their what they need as resources and investments and planning. And on the other, you see submissions that may have a bit more cushion, might not be as efficient. And also, people are submitting a bit in silos without that unifying vision. And so that leads to, wasteful planning and misalignment. So that shaped my approach at ChromaDex. And I tend to take a hybrid approach, tops down, bottoms up. It also suits my asking powerful questions, like I mentioned earlier. And, powerful questions. When someone said that to me, I said, what is that? What do they mean by that I ask powerful questions? Well, it's, according to one definition, they're open-ended. They empower the person responding to choose the direction they take. They create possibilities, encourage discovery, deeper understanding, and new insights. They're curious and non-judgmental. They seek further learning and connection. I love that. So I really bring that to the AOP process before I became CFO and continuing as CFO. A couple finance strategic moments that build on each other in that. One is, I came to realize that the AOP was new to ChromaDex. Unlike Mattel, where they'd been doing it for years, leaders were accustomed, it was new to us. And it had become a tool to drive prioritization of resources, which was not efficient. It led to churn, it led to redos and rework, and it just wasn't a good experience for people, even if we got to a good result at the end. So in partnership with the CEO and our head of HR and the leadership team, we dialed in our goals for the year and building to the next year in objectives and key results, and then ensure that the AOP submissions just very much laddered up and aligned to those. So that was an important step, and it got us closer. That clarity was good, but it wasn't the whole puzzle. So one aha moment or finance strategic insight was, decided to take the numbers, present scenarios, and actually translate the numbers into words. What are these scenarios telling us? What do you need to believe? What's included, what's not included? Just basically translate it into the story, if you will. And that storytelling was my finance strategic moment, because I realized, of course, I know the numbers. I would think every CFO knows the numbers. Their teams know the numbers. You can speak to them and you're accurate. But it's really that storytelling that you can get people to buy in to what they mean. And do they agree with them? Do they not? Are we missing something? And so that was really my finance strategic moment that I thought was very successful of taking that approach. And I look forward to building on that in the future.
Hello and welcome to 60-second stories from CFO Thought Leader. Looking back on their career-building years, few finance leaders ever forget the first time they presented to a board of directors. Present-day CFOs tell us that the penetrating stares from across the boardroom table remain locked in time, evergreen in their memories forever. For Jim Young, the stares that remain evergreen were not cast across a boardroom table, but instead a room populated by hundreds of his company's employees. Young says a finance presentation he gave a decade or more ago remains memorable because of what followed it. There were questions. Lots of them. However, Young tells us it was not his analysis or the inclusion of a new metric that the audience found so engaging. Instead, Young tells us it was simply because his presentation connected the dots. You'll hear that story and much more on episode number 876 of CFO Thought Leader, featuring CFO Jim Young of Coalition. Remember, the future of finance is listening.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Perfect. We are up to our mentoring round, where we like to ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. I sort of already asked you this, the first question I ordinarily ask here, so I was thinking I would change it somewhat. And you took us on your journey from equity research and then to Mattel, where it was about FP&A, and I'm giving an abbreviated view, but I'm wondering if, as you look back now, if you would have given yourself a piece of advice along the way, whether it was maybe you could have moved more quickly out of equity research. It's always easier in hindsight to make these. But as you look back, is there some piece of advice you might have given yourself at some point along the way?
Yeah, Jack, I was actually going to say the same thing. It's easy in hindsight, but maybe be more decisive and make those moves quicker. At the same time, I do always look back at my decisions with no regrets. And I'm the type that listen, analyze all the data, then be decisive. I'm not sure that would have worked for me because it come to the point where I said, I'm not growing at a pace that I want to be growing at. I'm still enjoying it. For example, equity research, I enjoy it. I'm learning, but it's decelerating. I think I needed to come to that all the way to that point for me. But I guess what I would encourage to others is, yes, don't be scared to make that leap. And the sooner you can make that leap and you can zig and zag and start rebuilding, with new skill sets, it's not as scary or intimidating as you might think. Leaving a place that I'd been at 11 years was scary. I had colleagues, I was comfortable, but then I jumped into Mattel and I had just an equally rich, enjoyable experience where that was hard to leave to come to ChromaDex. So every time, we're resilient, we can reinvent yourself. So take that leap, take that chance. But again, for me personally, I'm here now. I'm very proud to have achieved this role, of course, with the tremendous mentors. No one does it alone. So much credit to those who shaped my journey and supported me. But yes, I wouldn't regret it for myself personally of moving faster.
Brianna, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. We're wondering if you have a habit that you're known for or part of a daily routine. I sometimes say, it might be something more that a family member points out to us, something you've been known for over time, something that sets you apart. Anything come to mind?
I was trying to think if I have any daily, habits or routines. I'm not sure that I do, although having discovered your podcast, listening to many episodes ahead of time, I think I need to make my daily routine to listen and, take a walk and just start my day or end my day that way, because I just gained so much rich insight from, peers in the industry that I had aha moments that I hadn't thought about. What I would say, it's more of, what I'm known for is, I mentioned I have two kids, 12 and 9, and we play board games, actual board games, not video games, although of course we have those too, board games and card games. And, I'm sure you've had many guests tell you a CFO's role, it's always on. There's always something to, worry about and think about and stress about. And that's naturally who I am. I always want to be helping move things for the better. But you need to, disconnect and have that reset. So for me, there's not really any such thing as balance. Someone told me balance was a myth, but what they told me is it's being present in the moment. And I love that because while I can't commit to balance, I can commit to, if we're going to carve out time and we're going to play some family board games, let's just be present in the moment. Let's put the cell phone away. It's maybe an hour, it's 2 hours. I can do that. The life will go on. And it's so nostalgic for me because I played with my parents. We still have some of my grandparents' board games, full instructions, fully intact. The boxes are a bit brittle, but it just is very nostalgic. And I think it creates that grounding for me to then be able to be at my best at work, where I'm always present in the moment there and not wondering what am I missing. So not necessarily a habit, but something for me that, is really
Are you
special.
playing like the classic board games as well as some of the, I guess, newer board games? Anyone you can recommend to us? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the newer ones that we liked is called Seven Wonders. So it's interesting because it's strategy. And again, we try to find that age appropriate, where my son won't get too frustrated as the 9-year-old in the room for 12-plus-year-old games. So we enjoy that one. And yeah, the classics too, the ones you could think of. We have my grandparents' sorry game, a little bit of luck, a little bit of chance, overcoming frustration in that one. So yes, a mixture of both, I'd say.
Excellent. Would you have a book recommendation for us?
Yes. One book, one of my favorites, and I say that because there's few books I've read twice in my life, or more than twice, is Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. He's one of the co-founders of Pixar. And it's not only about the creative process of producing award-winning computer animated films, really being a trailblazer in that area, but more importantly about creating a culture of creativity that's sustainable. And he really lets, people in, and it's not without failures and, things like that, setbacks, but the readers get a glimpse into that. So one of my favorite lessons, and there are really so many, but is that failure, if you approach it properly, can be an opportunity for growth. It's that growth mindset. I even hear in my kids' school, I try to encourage it, having that growth mindset. And so what the author says is, mistakes are an inevitable consequence of doing something new, and as such should be seen as valuable because without them, we'd have no originality. So I really love that. Again, there's so many lessons, but you can imagine that in a process as costly and time intensive as filmmaking, might be worried about, taking a step back, making a pivot. You have these sunk costs, but without taking that pause and assessing, and like you said, seeing something that you're going towards an iceberg, maybe it's not going to succeed, it would have been more costly not to do that, not to recognize it, not to intervene. And, I similarly encourage my kids, they kind of raise their eyebrows when I tell them this, but no, fail early and fail fast. Have that growth mindset. As long as you learn from it, failure is one of the best teachers. And same goes for leadership. Foster that culture of creativity where people feel safe to take prudent risks and learn from their mistakes. So that's one I love. And then just the other two briefly, Multipliers, the best leaders make everyone smarter. That just kind of illustrates different types of leaders. And I had some moments saying, oh, even though I had wonderful mentors, I see a trait here or there. So you can also learn what you don't want to do as much as what you do want to do. So I love that one. And then Balance is another one that I love, kind of overcoming adversity and coming out stronger.
Wonderful. Great selections for us. Thank you. We are up to our final question where we like to ask our guests to finally look forward for us, just the next 12 months. We're wondering what your CFO priorities would be.
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a strong recurring revenue base. We have 60% of our business e-commerce and consumers where once they buy our product the second time, it tends to be a fairly sticky business. So we have that benefit. However, like many other companies, we're looking at continued challenging capital markets environment, consumer, weakness and challenges in the environment there. And so, my job first and foremost, like I said earlier, what metric do I feel responsible for the most is cash. Cash is king. It's important that we can weather this. And so I want to manage our cash wisely. I mentioned we're approaching profitability. We need to get to there. I want people to feel confident, people at ChromaDex, that their CFO is a safe pair of hands, that I'm going to help us make wise investment decisions that do have a short-term return on investment. And that was a pretty dramatic pivot we made midway through 2022 when we saw this coming, and we saw it coming earlier, made the pivot mid-year, and it served us well. And at the same time, you mentioned R&D, trade off near-term innovation investments. Those are always the easiest ones to cut. We have a supplement business today. We're selling, our brand is strong. You could forgo future innovation, but you don't want to forgo that to a detriment of the long term. So it's that balance, and also just that they trust me to make the difficult decisions that help us all, weather the storm. Fear is really a demotivator. And if people can feel confident I'm managing and helping steer the business with our CEO and leadership team wisely, then I think it breeds the culture of innovation and creativity where people feel secure and inspired. So that's my primary focus the next 12 months.
Brianna Gerber, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you so much, Jack. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.